Welcome to this special series for the Docs with Disabilities podcast, part of the Disability Resource Hub, a project made possible through funding from the Josiah Macy Jr. Foundation Catalyst Award for Transformation in Graduate Medical Education. This initiative is a collaboration between the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education, the ACGME, and the Docs with Disabilities Initiative, designed to promote disability accessibility across residency and fellowship training. Throughout this series, you'll hear from residents, fellows, program directors, researchers, and national leaders, each offering insight into what it means to create access in clinical learning environments. Together with program directors, we'll explore how programs can better support residents with disabilities. In addition to these powerful conversations, we've created a full library of resources for graduate medical education, available in Learn at ACGME. You can find the link to the hub in the show notes, and we hope you'll explore and share these resources widely. We're so glad you're here. Let's get started.
Hey, I'm Josh Schammel. I am a PGY5, so a chief resident at Albany Medical Center, and then originally from Greenville, South Carolina. And then I actually will be going for men's health or sexual medicine fellowship at Rush University this coming July 2026.
Yeah, I'm Brian Inouye. I'm the Associate Residency Program Director and Associate Professor of Urology at Albany Medicine. I am trained or subspecialized in reconstructive urology, but a lot of my passion really lies with residency education.
Hi, I'm Becky Stetzer. I am a family physician with a specialty in geriatrics, and I'm involved in this case by my role as Assistant Dean of Competency Development. And for that role, I serve as a support for medical students, residents, and fellows who need some support outside of the standard curriculum to help meet competency goals. And so I was able to meet Dr. Schammel in this capacity.
Thank you all. First, I just want to start off commending you in your article. It's an article that I really love. I think we'll get into a lot of the details as we go. I want to start with Dr. Schammel, with bringing you as you began urology residency. As most people know, transitioning into residency is intense for everyone. And your journey as a urology resident began as an off-cycle resident midway through your second year. Could you take us to that time and what you experienced in that time?
Yeah, so with normal residency, you start as an intern, you have the consistency of having the same training, the same attendings, the same EMR, the same system through your entire residency. For me, that wasn't the case. I came in from a preliminary general surgery year, and then as well as 3 months of research. So I came into Albany's urology residency not having kind of that formative experience of doing intern year here. So was almost like an intern starting, but like all the interns had already known each other. The twos who I was with at the time had known each other for, at that point, almost a year and some change. So I was very much an unknown coming in. And so I started off on a floor rotation as evidenced in kind of the start of my residency, and coming in from a general surgery prelim year versus, doing an intern year in urology where you get 6 months of general surgery, 6 months of urology. A lot of the things that I had learned in my intern year, even though I was working with urologists, was very different than how we did things here at Albany Med. So that was already kind of a first hurdle to overcome as a resident coming in from an outside program, but even coming in off cycle. They needed someone to kind of hit the ground running. And I came in with a lot of fervor and passion, but there were obviously things I didn't know how to do coming in. And so that was definitely kind of where the challenges began to start with that time, because it was like where, everyone had to kind of determine what knowledge is he coming in with, what skills is he coming in with. And some of that is based on like people being able to know you. So the attendings would look at the time, my PGY2 co-residents and be like, well, they know this much. Like you don't know this much. And it was like very clear, like, yeah, that's understandable. And the attendings were very patient with me kind of in the run up of everything. But again, as time goes on and, I was trying to overcome some of those challenges, that patience began to kind of to taper off when it was like, okay, look, you've had 6 months being here, we were kind of starting to expect you to be a little farther along than you are. I got through my third year, and then that started to culminate as I was starting to transition at the time into my fourth year. We began to have discussions of, we don't feel like you're far enough along on the residency track, and we need to start having conversations about, where do we need to go from here? And the way it was painted, and the way that's very important, is because we want to create safe urologists here at Albany Medical Center. And so how do we keep you moving forward in the program and still attain that ultimate goal?
So what I'm hearing from you is a mix of challenges. There was sort of the social challenge, one of just moving to a new place where people didn't know you. There was sort of a specialty challenge of changing from one specialty to a different specialty with different expectations. A new institution, which also has its own challenges. Had you had similar challenges in transitioning before this time in urology?
I mean, it's hard because when I started as an intern in general surgery, it was kind of assumed to just be, well, he's an intern. Like, interns don't really know that much coming in. There were some events that happened during my intern year that, looking back, probably caused some PTSD that may have started to affect how things started to develop at Albany Med. And it's hard because you go through life like, made straight, pretty much straight A's in high school, went to Davidson College for undergrad, was able to balance being a swimmer undergrad with a very demanding pre-med curriculum, was able to get into, made it into med school, made it through med school with a focus on going into surgery or a surgical subspecialty. And so that all that time, obviously it gets harder and harder as you go on, but it wasn't like I didn't feel like I had specific problems with communicating with others, like mastering material, because I had been able to do it so far. But again, it like part of it is like looking back at my life kind of with this in mind. There were elements that I can see of, like, I definitely had some elements of PTSD even in college. I had performance anxiety when I think about my college swimming career. I had performance anxiety then, and that definitely showed some of the issues that ended up showing up at Albany Med were present when I was in college. I just didn't recognize them. And so it's hard because a lot of this now gets viewed through the lens of what has happened. And then I'm like, oh yeah, like that totally makes sense why that happened now. Like why I had a lot of problems before a big race and felt like I couldn't function makes a lot of sense in retrospect, but didn't obviously cross my brain at the time. And so this has been a very formative experience for me because it has reshaped how I view various elements of my past and seen kind of the things that had led up to that moment.
Okay, thanks. And I have a question for Dr. Inouye. So as someone who's in program leadership, from the article, it sounds like you may have been getting some messages that Dr. Schammel was having some challenges. I'm curious to hear first your general approach for what do you do when you get sort of potential messages about a trainee that they may be struggling in some way, and how do you decide when to intervene versus not?
It's really tough. I think the answer to your first question is when you hear about a resident that could be struggling, the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that they're okay, right? There are so many things that happen both in the hospital, but especially outside of the hospital during training. All of us attendings have gone through training ourselves, and we've all experienced different hardships. And it's important to remember that everyone is human, that everyone has a life. And so that's the first thing. As much as Josh brought up how our goal through all this is to create a safe urologist, more importantly, we're a family. We brought you in as a trainee with us. We want to make sure our family's okay. That's like above and beyond. That's what we want to make sure is happening. And so it is a tough discussion that you have to have with these trainees where, yeah, people are basically talking behind your back, right? And it's kind of stinks to hear about that, but that's how a lot of the information is relayed in a training program, especially one as small as a urology program. Granted, we're kind of in a middle-sized program with 3 residents per year. So we have 15 residents. We have almost 12 to 15 faculty, but it's small enough that anonymity is sometimes lost when things are brought up. But I do think that instead of letting problems fester, hitting them straight on to kind of see, is there something big going on that we need to help the resident, the trainee, whether it be giving time off, whether it be giving them any type of other resource to help. And that's where Josh fell in. I mean, it was pretty clear early on that I honestly think we did a little bit of a disservice kind of thinking he's going to hit the ground running as soon as he joined our program off cycle. And we hadn't thought about how he had a different electronic medical record previously. He hadn't had those 4 to 6 months of urology training as an intern that his co-residents did. So the expectations were clearly off. But very quickly, we did notice that, and we put him on it wasn't even a remediation plan. It was just kind of like a team building exercise with different faculty to kind of help all the different tenants and different competencies where we thought that perhaps we needed to elevate him. And so it really took a village to help Josh out, and everyone was very willing. And honestly, I want to thank Josh mostly because without his willingness to kind of engage with it all, this wouldn't have been possible. And at the time, I mean, again, we didn't have anything. This was the first time we'd had someone start mid-cycle. This was the first time we had a resident truly struggle in multiple competencies. So we were kind of building everything around Josh as a case example, as you see in this paper. And so we've learned a lot. We've now kind of have something set up for if someone does have to come in mid-cycle or if someone has to take time off. We have something now in terms of a remediation plan, whereas before we did it. But to get back to your point, it's really tough to have these conversations, but you kind of have to put that challenge aside as leadership because our role at the end of the day is to make sure everyone is safe, both physically and for our patients.
I have a question that's a bit for the both of you, but I guess first I want to just take a pause and really give a deep message of appreciation to Dr. Schammel. I believe, as someone who has very recently completed medical training, I believe that it is extremely challenging to share stories of struggling for various fears. And I think it's incredibly powerful and impactful that you are willing to. And so first, I just want to say thank you because it actually is changing the world with doing this, changing the community, local community, institutions, broader world. I have a question about, there's a quote that you say in your article where it says that initially it wasn't clear the dire nature of the situation. I want to know what you meant by that and how it was conveyed to you.
Yeah, so the dire nature of the situation is that you get fired as a resident. If you can't meet criteria, or you've shown that you can't respond to the measures that are kind of being put in place to try to help you. Obviously, the leadership understands that, you've sacrificed a lot to get to this. I mean, student loans, everything like that. And so there are programs probably in the United States who would have been like, well, you can't meet the milestones. We're going to let you go. I thankfully was at a training program that said, well, let's invest into this resident. Let's investigate a little bit further because, like Dr. Inouye said, this is a family. You want to figure out what's going on specifically with the family member rather than just casting immediate judgment and potentially causing a massive career change or something like that. And I guess, it's hard because that was not on my radar of I could potentially be fired for something like this if I was at a different program, because until we had that conversation, and I forget if it was you, Dr. Inouye, or Dr. Kogan or Dr. White, was like, look, this is the trajectory where this is headed. We would like to avoid this as whatever the cost, but you need to be aware that this is where things are headed if things don't improve. And I think at that moment was when it truly sunk in kind of what was happening in the moment. And I think that was one of the things that caused me to really examine my attitude and be willing to do whatever it took in order to fix the situation, was how it was presented to me of you don't understand how serious this is. And we need you to be on the same page so that you can buy into the plan appropriately.
Having this more direct conversation was helpful as opposed to hurtful.
Yeah, we took a lot of time to kind of put together a plan and be as objective as possible. I think whenever you have these types of conversations, the more objective data and the more straightforward you can be, the better. I do think then that it's incumbent upon the resident to either want to do it or not. Everyone has free will, in my opinion. And I do think that the quote of the dire nature is actually what was not only the aha moment, but it also led to the ability to accomplish all of this, right? Like, as we're going to discuss when we get Dr. Stetzer involved, is that one of the tenets of someone to succeed with this approach is that they have to be all in. And I think there are a lot of probable teachers that are listening to this that are going to be like, well, half of my learners have this moment, and sometimes half of them don't, right? They don't realize it's this dire nature. And those are struggling residents too. And so you need to find a different path to be able to try to accomplish the true nature and severity of any type of problem to then get the appropriate help.
I think it's the perfect time to bring in Dr. Stetzer. So, Dr. Stetzer, we're coming together at this point where it sounds like remediation has been sort of thrown out as a potential path for Dr. Schammel, that he's sounding like he's quickly getting bought into the plan. I guess, can you bring us into, so what role did you play in this? And I would love to hear more about your general perspective on remediation as well in trainees.
Yeah, sure. So I was brought in by the urology team, I think after they'd been working with Dr. Schammel some. They'd already done some work on improving his knowledge base, which he'd engaged in. But we're noticing that despite those interventions, he was still struggling. And so my role is, it's nice sort of being outside of the residency programs. I can have a little bit of a bigger perspective. And also my role is to help support the residents. So I'm not evaluating or anything in that same way. So I think it can be helpful as a little bit more of a safe space for people to come in and really be able to hopefully get to that point of being really honest about what's going on, because it can be hard in this medical culture where you're always putting your best foot forward, right? Always trying to seem like you know the answer. We're sort of conditioned to hide when we don't know. So it can be quite a barrier to get through that. But one of the things and one of the reasons I really wanted to elevate this story is that Dr. Schammel really came in by the time I was able to work with him. He did realize what was at stake and came in so open to talk about all of these different things so we could quickly get to the root of things. And so when I'm brought in to help with the remediation, one of the things I start with is really trying to do a deep dive, looking into what different domains might be impacting a learner. As Dr. Inouye had said, like you have to be thinking about what's going outside of the house, right? Like, or the outside of work, and what could be impacting somebody, but also looking in terms of what's going on in terms of communication abilities and challenges, sort of structural challenges with organization, motivation, as well as a cognitive and learning base. And as we got into these conversations, what Dr. Schammel was able to share indicated that he was struggling on a few different fronts. And so that really helped us, one, to sort things out, to look at where are some of the different areas that we could help target. There are some communication difficulties he was having within the program. There were procedural difficulties he was having. He had mentioned his performance anxiety, as well as some of the learning base and trying to build that up. And so looking at that, I always try to think about when I've got learners that I'm working with, what interventions can we start with right away? And if there's a suspected cognitive disability underlying these things, how do we then proceed with unearthing that in a way that's comfortable to the learner, first of all, and is something that is able to help inform what we're doing in a way and seeing what accommodations might be made. And so one of the things that we were able to start doing is that Dr. Schammel and I started meeting to work on some of these different tactics, as well as getting referrals to some different areas that we thought might be helpful to him. And then I had a number of conversations with the urology leadership about what are some different ways that we could help support him and make accommodations. Even if we didn't have a specific disability diagnosis, there are accommodations that could be made. And so what helped the whole situation have success and helped us support Dr. Schammel is that everybody was willing to do this, right? The urology program was really open to suggestions and trying things in a different way. And Dr. Schammel was open to that as well. So even though everything didn't go perfectly smoothly, and some of our referrals took a little bit longer, we were still able to move forward.
So I just have two reflections on this part. So the first is one that the audience will not have been able to see because this will be an audio. When Dr. Stetzer began talking, Dr. Schammel began smiling. That for me is actually quite remarkable. As many people externally may think of remediation as a very sort of painful, unideal, isolating process, but that does not appear to be the relationship that you two have with each other, at least from my nonverbal cues. And the two of you are nodding, so I think that they would agree with this. The second thing is a really huge nod to the program and you, Dr. Stetzer, for advocating for this. Of oftentimes with accommodations, there's a very sort of clinical approach that you must have your, DSM diagnosis, ICD, whatever, in order to get accommodations. And it sounds like the program was proactively giving accommodations, even in a sort of dynamically evolving diagnosis environment. And I think that also is quite remarkable and something to be highlighted.
I would agree. I'll just, if I may jump in, that one of the things that I find that can be especially challenging when we're talking about cognitive disabilities, and by that sort of meaning neurodivergence like ADHD or autism spectrum, or transient disabilities like depression or anxiety or trauma responses, right? Those types of things that really do interfere with somebody's ability to perform. It can be really hard to be able to get to the point where they're identified, and then a whole other leap with disclosure. Right. And so Dr. Schammel is, I would say, unusual in his openness with this. But part of, what I'd love to highlight is that we don't have to have a disclosure to be able to make reasonable accommodations. And especially as we're thinking about, that learner-centered teaching or a universal design for learning, the whole point is to be dynamic. And there are a lot of things that we can do that is going to be able to allow learners to have the support and flexibility that they need without having to put them in that position.
It made it really easy for us to make accommodations when we have someone as great as Dr. Stetzer giving us recommendations, right? Like, we trust her wholeheartedly. And I remember that all the leadership was talking about Josh, and we were trying to figure out how we can best help him. And Dr. Stetzer actually gave a talk at the Albany Med GME about what she does. And I'm sure she kicks herself for giving that talk because now she's inundated with work. However, as soon as we got off that call, I sent an email to her explaining Josh's situation, that we needed a second opinion to help us do this, and that we were willing to do everything to make it work. Again, we want all of our trainees to succeed, and whatever we can do, even though, it's tough. I'm going to be completely honest with you. There was some pushback amongst the faculty, right? Like, this is a surgical subspecialty. How do we take time out of the day to do this and that? Because we do need to give training to make him a competent surgeon, for example. But if you're willing to do it, we'll find ways to do it. And again, I was very impressed. Even though we had some pushback, everyone did to come together at the end to be able to make Josh succeed, which was really cool.
Yeah, I would just even say, it's one of the things that I think the smartest decision that was made by the leadership was to just be like, look, you're just going to have to repeat third year. Because you have to have the knowledge and the training to become a competent urologist. And how do you balance a learner who's very obviously struggling and needs time to figure this out at the same time, while Dr. Inouye said, we don't have a ton of residents. We only have 3 per year. And so we still have our basic workload that we have to be able to meet. And so how does he maintain being in clinic, maintain being in the OR, while also undergoing this was kind of the big challenge kind of going forward. And as much as it sucked to have to put life plans on hold, like fellowship, this whole process impacted some personal relationships at the time. But at the end of the day, having that additional time for me really made the difference, because it gave me time to figure a lot of this out And it also gave me the opportunity, like you don't get a whole lot of do-overs in medicine. And that was one of the big challenges of this whole process, was because I had burnt a lot of bridges with regards to attending trust. Like it was like we don't trust him to have the knowledge in this situation. We don't trust him to have the skills in this situation. And so I was given the rare opportunity to do a couple of these rotations, as much as it sucked to do them again. I got do-overs, and it gave me the opportunity, once kind of this overall diagnosis of, well, he doesn't have autism or ADHD. It's a lot of post-traumatic stress. And I started taking propanolol to help with the OR. It gave me an opportunity to be like, okay, with everything to the side, now that this particular problem is fixed, now let me show you what I'm actually capable of. And I feel like that helped rebuild a lot of that trust that had been kind of burnt, kind of leading up to this process.
I want to go back just a tiny bit in time, and I want to hear your experience of the sessions with Dr. Stetzer, the sort of remediation process, the getting your diagnosis, both from the positive side, but also the challenges that you had.
Yeah. So, I mean, having Dr. Stetzer come in was amazing because it felt like there was an outside observer who was on my side. And I know, and one of the challenges kind of leading up to this was, I love our leadership, but a lot of it to me felt very punitive. Like, why am I being forced to do this? Why is everyone on my back? I'm over here trying as hard as I can to meet these criteria. To obviously, I want to come to work and be competent. Like, why can't people see this? And so the great thing about this whole process was like there was like an immediate like pause placed in this. And like Dr. Stetzer came in, and it feels like there's someone finally on my side. And that at least allowed me to get kind of out of the defensive mindset that I was in, and realize that the leadership wasn't actually coming at me in a punitive manner. I don't have kids of my own, but like I assume it came across more of like, look, we're really trying to help you in this situation. And once that connection had kind of been made that, oh, the administration is not attacking me in this, they're really trying to figure out the way with which, to help me succeed and move forward to do what I'm very passionate about doing, is kind of what I think was kind of the turning point of the whole situation. And that didn't happen overnight. As we talked about, like it took a while for me to get in with psychiatry and start taking propanolol to help with the performance anxiety. It took time for me to actually have a running diagnosis of essentially PTSD. For me to get into neuropsych testing, I think took 6 months, maybe longer. And that was, again, where the benefit of being told to repeat a year essentially bought time for me to be able to do this. And I was able to come at things with fresh eyes. And trust is a hard thing to rebuild. Like it's hard to like come in and be, well, I'm doing this now. And they're like, okay, sure. Is this just a flash in the pan, or is this like a long-term change or an improvement? And so there's so many different aspects of this situation that to me, I'm actually, it sucked while I did it, but I'm actually very lucky. And like, I feel very grateful for the whole situation, because it feels like I am not only on track to become a safe urologist when I leave from the program, but I feel like a more well-rounded individual, because some of the techniques that I've learned, undergoing the testing, doing, taking the propanolol. I mean, the administration was, willing to work with me enough that they helped me. I had to leave clinic sometimes to go meet with the psychiatrist. I see a counselor regularly to talk about kind of things that have happened during the week, but also try to dig deeper to identify, core issues that may not have been resolved. And neuropsych testing also took, time and resources from the administration. And so I can't, again, begin to say how grateful I am that I have the leadership at the program that I have, because I am convinced I would not have gotten that at other places.
And so you mentioned some of your accommodations. So it sounds like you have some protected time to go to your mental health appointments. What else do accommodations look like for you now after all of this?
The mental health stuff is probably the most, I'm not aware of many other accommodations that I get. I do communicate a lot more with faculty than I did before. And so I'm more willing to like keep people updated. I'm sure Dr. Inouye has heard his fair share of headaches from my end of like, hey, Dr. Inouye, how am I doing? Like, this is what's going on, things like that. And so it's more of kind of maybe informal relationships that got built because of what has happened. But for the most part, it seems like the accommodations that are current as a chief for me are mainly just the protected time to go to mental health appointments, things like that. But Dr. Inouye could also weigh in and see if there's anything I'm not aware of.
I mean, kind of an informal accommodation was, we did have a big meeting about Josh amongst the faculty to discuss kind of giving him a blank slate. And I think that was incredibly helpful. Josh said, I think some of the faculty had trust issues with him, but we wanted everyone to give him a second chance. And yes, it was difficult and not everyone just flipped the switch and said, we can start over. But I do think everyone by the end of this gave him that second chance, which I think was incredibly important for Josh to grow. Now, I do want to go back. I mean, resources are a big deal, especially in this day and age, and especially coming out of COVID, for example. Getting Josh evaluated took a lot of time. And something that I was not really aware of was kind of the financial component of it. Testing is not cheap, and your program only has so many resources to go around. And thankfully, we were able to work with Albany Med to kind of split the cost of it, knowing how important it was. But it is something to think about if people listening to this do have to go down a similar situation, that it doesn't come free. And so finding the resources to be able to do all this is incredibly important. But if you're willing to do it, like I said, and thankfully the rest of my partners in leadership were, it didn't matter how expensive it was, we were going to get Josh help.
Dr. Stetzer, a question for you. I'm less interested in Dr. Schammel's specifics, but what are the sort of types of, treatment is the right word, or skills? What types of things do you work on with learners?
Yeah, so there are a variety of things depending on where some of the struggles are. I'll work with learners on trying to help improve knowledge base. We'll talk about different ways of approaching studying, especially when there are folks who might have some executive functioning difficulties, especially difficulties with working memory. That can make it really hard to attain knowledge and study and have sort of that sustained focus. And it can also affect clinical performance, especially with like giving presentations or that sort of thing. So moving into that, we'll do various executive functioning support, some of that really. And this is still actually an area that I'm learning more about and exploring because there's not a lot of resources out about how to support medical learners or medical professionals with this. So I've sort of begged and borrowed from a bunch of different sources to try to come up with some different approaches and support tools. And then the other thing that I've worked with quite a bit with learners is in terms of trying to help with some patient communication as well as professional communication. Sometimes there can be some difficulties in terms of reading body language or being able to be aware of what they're portraying with body language. And so I'm actually based out of our simulation center. And so a lot of the work that we'll do is put together. I always joke with my learners that I'm going to create their worst nightmare and then we're going to live it over and over again. But so we put together challenging scenarios, some of them one-on-one, and a few times we've actually put together complicated ER scenarios that have also included other medical professionals to try to pull out different aspects of that, working with nurses or other attendings. And sometimes that can help just gain some insight for the learners to be able to go through it and have that safe space where we stop and they get some feedback, or we go over the videos to sort of examine some of the interactions. And it also gives people a chance to workshop some of it. So we'll go through something and then they won't like the way it went, or they'll get some feedback and be able to work on that again. So it's usually a combination of those different tactics.
Thank you. And I would love to hear, Dr. Stetzer, your reflections on the impact of Dr. Schammel's sort of experiences, the learnings that you've had or that you've seen the institution that have impacted the institution.
Yeah. So, as Dr. Inouye mentioned, I gave that presentation to the Graduate Medical Education Council. And after that, I did become quite a bit busier. And so I've had the opportunity to work with a number of learners, and it's been really nice to see how pulling together with support that we've had a lot of people that have really had a lot of success. As I was doing this, there was also a GME effort to put together sort of a committee to help evaluate with some of the challenges that came up. That one's focused a little bit more on professionalism, but a lot of times, of course, these things overlap, and what can come across as unprofessional behavior really is rooted in some of the different things that I work with. So with these two efforts, one is we're having more conversations, and even in the referrals that I get, people are thinking about this much more broadly, and we'll notice that, I've got somebody that I think maybe has some learning needs that are beyond what we're able to do, or we're wondering if there are some different ways that we might be able to approach their learning. So it's just that the tone of the conversations are different. I think partly just because there is a resource, right? Whereas before there wasn't, as well as to start thinking about, what might be underlying some of the issues. I think it's really hard when, you don't have resources to address some of these different things that might come up. The other thing is just having some policies. And so again, with Dr. Schammel, I had never referred anybody for neuropsych testing before. And so it was figuring out what our resources are, what the costs were. It was actually a surprise to all of us. Do we go through the learner's insurance? Is it something entirely from the academic side? And then simply access. I mean, in our area, at least, people are booking out for a year. So it's a really big challenge. And, we've tried to balance trying to pull in resources from within the institution and finding what skills and availability is here that matches our needs versus outside. And so after we had the delay with Dr. Schammel and did find somebody in the community that sort of met our needs, our GME leadership has formed a relationship. So we actually have now an ability to reach out, and they sort of fast track our referrals, just knowing that, we don't have a year when you're talking about a resident. So it's those sorts of things that have really made a palpable difference.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think there's a lot been written and spoken about the multiple reasons of access challenges for neuropsychiatric testing. Dr. Inouye, I'm curious to hear your reflection in program leadership, the impact of Dr. Schammel, his experiences.
Yeah, I kind of alluded to it before. We didn't have anything written down for any of this. We were kind of flying by the seat of our pants, and thankfully we had Dr. Stetzer as an ally with us as well to help us kind of build this. So, we do have things in place now for people that might join off-cycle. We have something in place for identifying possibly struggling residents. And more importantly, we have, and all this are given to the residents at the beginning of each academic year. We kind of have a pathway of what happens if people hit kind of, I don't know, for lack of a better word, these kind of negative milestones, right? Like if you aren't able to achieve your ACGME milestones, you're going to go ahead and do X, Y, and Z, which we didn't have before. And so it allows our residents complete transparency of what we're looking for. And it also kind of gives us that backing that we know what we're doing because it worked in Dr. Schammel's situation. And so we do have something for example, maybe a knowledge-based pathway, but we also do have something that's based in kind of a professionalism pathway. And I have been working with the committee that Dr. Stetzer alluded to as well at our institution, and they were very instrumental in building kind of that pathway out. And so I honestly think not only is it in our department, but across all of Albany Med over the last year or two, there's been a focus on helping learners, which is really cool and really cool to build. And so we've been building these different pathways to give everyone, not just in your urologist, anyone who is, a trainee at Albany Med, the ability to succeed.
Dr. Schammel, I'm curious to hear, looking back, reflecting on your residency time and experiences, what are you most proud of?
My ability to stick with things and not quit. There were a lot of times where that seemed like the easy option, was just like, I don't know why I'm going through all of this to just be essentially miserable at home. But I mean, it is something I will always be proud of. If it's like, this is probably, I mean, residency is, I think, automatically the hardest part of a lot of people's lives. This has been really hard. And to come out on the other side, well, I still have 9 more months, but to come out on the other side of this feeling more confident in myself, in my abilities. And like I said earlier, I want to be a safe urologist, but at the end of the day, I also want to be a more well-rounded individual. And I know that this whole experience has made me a better person than when I was before I started it. And this whole process has been an opportunity for me to give back. Obviously, this is one of the reasons that this podcast is occurring is because, the 3 of us were able to write a manuscript and get it published and try to bring wider awareness to the whole situation. And it really comes back to a couple quotes that have always stuck with me. There was a quote from an interview that was done with Stephen Colbert, and his quote was, "What punishments of God are not gifts?" There's other quotes from just the wide world of just like, too much has been given, much is expected. And so this whole process has taught me a lot about myself, about how I interact with individuals around me, how tough I am as an individual myself. And being open and honest about this is my ability to give that gift to other people who might be in the similar situation. And I don't know a lot of what goes on in the other residency programs, but I know for myself as an individual, and especially as a chief in our program here, that I have a little bit more say now, and trying to like go to residents who I see may need someone to just say, "Hey, I struggled with this too. You don't have to feel like you're alone." Because I think that was one of the worst parts of, this before it got to this point, was feeling alone in this particular situation because people don't talk about it. And so to feel like, well, I feel like I'm the only resident who's dealing with this issue. No one else is doing this. Everyone else seems like they're doing such a good job. Why am I struggling? And it just becomes this negative thought cycle and negative feedback loop that just makes things worse and worse. And so for me to be like, hey, like this this individual seems like they're having a lot of issues with nerves before they go to the OR, and being like, hey, you see me pop a propranolol before I go into the OR because like this particular case is something that's very high stakes. I'm feeling anxiety about this, and I know that this helps me in this situation to stay focused and know that, hey, I have the training for this. I have the knowledge for this. Obviously the solutions that work for me don't necessarily work for everybody else, but I think just coming alongside someone and being like, hey, you're not alone. I'm here with you. Like, let's try to deal with this together really helps. And especially with being in control of when I'm on call of a service, and like seeing things that go wrong, and being able to try to put myself in like my junior resident shoes. It's like, I could be mad and scream at a junior because they got something wrong. Or I can be like, I remember what it feels like to be in that situation and to realize, oh crap, I screwed something up, just waiting for the other shoe to drop and being like, hey, let's talk about this. Is there something going on at home that may be affecting this? Like, my eventual goal is to be involved with a residency program, to hopefully run my own fellowship one day, and to be a good teacher like I've had from Dr. Stetzer and Dr. Inouye and a lot of the other mentors in my life. You have to have that ability to be empathetic to your trainees. And so I feel like this has given me that gift that I can become a better educator and, mentor going forward because of what I've been through.
I want to first, again, just thank you for everything you just said, and also highlight the fact that, you said you have 9 months left, but the end of residency is in sight. And it sounds like you successfully attained a fellowship position as well. And so to me, that's obviously, those just add to the testament of, the impressive work that you've done, supported by your community. So my last question for everyone, I'll go Dr. Stetzer, Dr. Inouye, and then Dr. Schammel, is what advice would you give to trainees who maybe are navigating diagnoses or challenges during residency? And what advice would you give to residency leaders?
I think I'd like to actually echo what Dr. Schammel just said, which is you're not alone, right? There are a lot of people going through this. I think as we do better in medical education, we realize that A lot of people have learning needs that are outside the standard curriculum. And so the more that we recognize this and the more that is accepted, right, and really anticipated, the better that we're going to do. And as we're talking about this, then as educators, we can do a better job of identifying when people need more help, and hopefully that the stigma will be reduced and learners can be more open about where they're struggling. So I think one of it is talking about it. And the other is forming a team. In doing this work, I've become involved in a separate team that's outside the institution where we get together every couple of months to talk about different tactics for helping struggling learners and going through cases where people are having difficulties. And I find that just having that resource of other people doing the same work can be really helpful. I also think on that same side, it's helpful for learners when they're able to connect to talk about going through these different things. That can be a really good resource. So, sort of focusing on that, you're not alone, really reach out to your team and use each other's resources.
Josh is going to like some of the things I'm about to say because I steal them from Ted Lasso. I think Ted Lasso has taught us different tips for leadership in terms of leaning into vulnerability, asking questions, and doing the right thing is never wrong. So in terms of leadership, if you see someone struggling, it always is very difficult. And I see a lot of my partners struggle with this. But at the end of the day, I remind them that it's kind of our job as educators to help and to teach. And we've all been through it. We are not who we are today as we were 10, 20 years ago. We got here because people took the time to teach us. And if you don't think that anyone ever shaped your career or your learning, you're foolish. And so you need to become that person to be able to help these people through it. And then you need to know your own limits, right? Like when we worked with Josh just within our department, we learned after about 6 months that this was more than we knew what to do with. And so that is when we started looking around to figure out how we could get additional resources. Like I said, thankfully, Dr. Stetzer, it was just very fortuitous that she gave that talk and we were able to link up and build this team, to her point. But you need to know that hopefully this inspires everyone to be more open about it. And with people being more open about it, the conversations will just build the teams that much faster. And so residents can get the help that much faster and everyone can succeed that much faster.
Yeah, for me, the biggest takeaways that I always had were I now have knowledge of I haven't gone through it myself. I now have knowledge of other people's struggles. And so it really, the empathy perspective has been huge, just not even for myself, but like stepping into more of the role of a chief resident and having juniors below me, like having that ability to stop and reevaluate a situation in light of what has happened has been phenomenal. Because like at the end of the day, like I had a lot of stuff happen to me. I have elements of PTSD that I've accrued through my training. I know we all do going through medical education, and really trying to be in that position where the buck stops here. And that's hard to do a lot of days, because the easy way would just be like, well, I'm just going to treat people how I have been treated because that's how I learned. But at the end of the day, to stop and take a moment and be like, I don't want to treat this individual in the same way that I was treated. I want to actually try to do the work to have a culture change, which I've seen in the program here, is really what I try to do forward. And it's great that I have a mentor like Dr. Inouye, who also loves Ted Lasso, because I have essentially my computer background is a picture of Bryce Young on the Carolina Panthers with the quote, I hope that either all of us or none of us are judged by the actions of our weakest moments, but rather by the strength we show when and if we're ever given a second chance. And I know as an individual who's benefited from second chances times 100, that, it is my duty going forward to return the kindness that I'd received. But it also requires, people to be open. I'm an individual who went unmatched, and I have gone out of my way to help other individuals who have gone unmatched. But I always tell them that it always comes with the understanding that you also be open about this and help people in that position as well. And so if nothing comes out of this, but the fact that I can make a positive impact on the culture for the residency program here, that would be enough. But it's been great because, like, again, having it posted on the intranet, like I had a random nurse in PACU come up to me who I've worked with for a while. But she was able to put name to the fact that the paper was published on our intranet and be like, oh, you wrote that paper. And it was like, oh, A, wow, I'm amazed anyone made that connection. But B, it's like, yeah, like I really want to go forward and kind of talk more about this because I want to help people in this situation because I want to help them avoid the potholes that maybe I went through, but at least show them like you're not alone when you go through it.
I think one of the cool things about the ACGME Docs with Disabilities Hub is that this is going to go to reach people all across the country, if not, international, the world. And so I think it will help a lot of people. To close, I just wanted to see if anyone had any last comments, things that we didn't talk about that they really want to bring up, reflections, anything.
I guess the one thing that I would just bring up is that we never actually touched upon one of the items in the title, which is the master adaptive learner approach. And so I just wanted to bring it home to that. The reason I'd really wanted to pull that in is that idea of the master adaptive learner is it's sort of similar to the PDSA triad, cycle, right? Where instead though it's, you learn, assess, and then make plans and go through this ongoing cycle of trying something, seeing if it works, adjusting and continuing to do that. And then it was just really remarkable to me that attitude was present both with Dr. Schammel and with the urology residency. And I really think about approaching difficult situations from that perspective and the expectation that things aren't going to get fixed the first time around. And the first solution is probably not going to be the ultimate solution, right? We have to approach these situations expecting that it's going to be iterative, and really looking at those baseline learner characteristics, of having a growth mindset and resilience and motivation. And Dr. Schammel has talked about this. That was that linchpin. But for him, that internal motivation was what was absolutely necessary for all of this to happen. And again, thinking when we're in those challenging situations, a lot of times I like to come back as, well, why are you here, right? What is your ultimate goal and how can we help get you there? Because otherwise it's just a grueling lot of work, right? But if we're working towards a goal, that's really what we're all here for. So I just like to reference that concept because I think that can be really helpful to come back to when you're in the midst of the struggle and the lack of clarity for some of these situations.
I think that's a great place to end. I want to send a lot of love and appreciation to you all for your honesty, for your insight. I believe that this conversation shows how that intentional efforts can shape success, both for learners, for programs, for institutions. And we are all incredibly grateful for your leadership and willingness to share your story. I want to again encourage people to read the paper, which is open access in Teaching, Learning, and Medicine. It is a master adaptive learner approach to cognitive disability support in a U.S. urology residency by Stetzer et al. Thank you for joining us for this special series of the Docs with Disabilities podcast, part of the Disability Resource Hub, made possible by the Josiah Macy Jr. Foundation Catalyst Award. We hope these conversations have sparked new ideas and deepened your commitment to advancing accessibility in graduate medical education. From the voices of residents and fellows to the insights of program directors and national leaders, one thing is clear: access does not happen by accident. It's built intentionally, one conversation, one policy, and one program at a time. To continue learning, visit the full Disability Resource Hub and learn at ACGME, linked in the show notes. Share with your colleagues, your teams, and your trainees. Because when we build systems that work for disabled learners, we build better systems for everyone. Until next time, stay curious, committed, and keep doing the good work.